Well, formally then, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending this panel meeting on education on this very warm afternoon, although I did say it is rather chilly in the Gloucester room, and the air conditioning I can say is working extremely well. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, we have apologies from Co-optee Elizabeth Lee, Bev Hopkins, Sarah Keaton, and that's it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any disclosures of personal or prejudicial interests? Anyone? No hands up, so I'm taking that as a no. So thank you. Obviously, there's a prohibition of whip votes. The next item is the minutes of the previous meetings, and I know you all will have had the chance to have had a look through them. Could I have a proposer that they're a true and accurate record? Anybody? Have we got a hand? Sorry. Oh, Francesca, yes, and James. Thank you very much. Great. Public question time. There are no public questions received, so we move straight on to item 6, which is an important part of the agenda, and that is managing and improving school attendance, including data. And we've got the Cabinet Member, Councillor Robert Smith, and Helen Morgan-Rees, and we've got Kate Phillips, Head of Vulnerable Learners, and Helen Howells, the Team Manager of Pupil Support. I don't know who wants to kick off first.
If I can just say a few words to introduce the item before we go ask the officers to take us through it. I think the report outlines some of the challenges and some of the strategies that we are hoping to develop and are developing in response to those challenges. Members who've been around as long as I have, and I mean, I'm not talking just as a councillor now, but school attendance has been an issue for the last 25 years, and I think there's been significant progress from where we were, as I said, 25 years ago with this. What we've had, I think, is a major setback caused partly by COVID, but coincided with COVID. And that calls for a different approach. It calls is an opportunity for us to review our processes, and it involves schools working with ourselves as an education directorate, but also a much broader range of partners need to be involved in a collaborative approach, working together and working to the same agenda if we are to resolve and solve this problem. So with those words of introduction, I don't know if it's Helen or Kate, if you want to take us through the report, and then perhaps we can open it up for discussion, Chair.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Helen or Kate, who's coming in first?
Helen Howells is the expert on this, so I think she's going to talk us through the report.
Oh, okay, thanks, Kate. I'm not sure about expert, but getting there definitely with all the reading we've done lately on it. I just want to echo Councillor Smith's introduction there. We have seen an unprecedented time recently, and I guess prior to the pandemic, the average attendance of primary schools in Swansea was 95%, and average attendance for secondary schools was 94.3%. So if we fast forward to the 2021-2022 academic year, the average attendance for primary schools slipped to 90.1%, and the secondary school average to 86.6%. We know that patterns of good attendance have been really hard to regain. We've seen small increases though. Our data shows that this year, primary schools attendance has increased to 91.2% and 88.4% for primary school for secondary schools. We're nowhere near the position that we want to be though, and we recognise that we do have a long journey ahead of us. So our data shows that this is a national challenge. It's not unique to Swansea. Swansea's position in Wales is pretty good, but that's not the point really, and that's not what we want to dwell on. We're most concerned about the children whose attendance hasn't regained to where we would like it to be. And, you know, the effects of the pandemic have been seen throughout the national picture, as I've said, but we do have an increase in anxiety, poor mental health. We've got an increase in challenges, all coupled with, I suppose, a cost of living crisis, which means the poverty is increasing as well. So we know that attendance has declined. We know that there's a blip. We know that schools are reporting, despite exhausting some of their strategies to increase attendance, some parents, they are reporting, are not seeing the importance of sending their children to school on a regular basis. But what we want to sort of stress is that attendance is everybody's responsibility. And as a local authority, we're engaging the support of all services and available to support our schools. So we've worked hard to ensure that we have an attendance strategy that is now fit for purpose. And our individual EWOs are equipped with strategies to assist schools in this changing landscape that we now find ourselves in. So we've consulted with all our stakeholders. We're confident that we have a change in approach from the traditional attendance strategies, and we want to introduce a more radical response to school avoidance to be fully embedded in the new academic year. So we want more more detailed analysis of data. We want EWOs to be equipped with further training to help them analyse their data themselves and provide them with key performance indicators. Our Education Welfare Service have compiled a best practice guide, which catalogues best interventions, and they've had specific training on ALN, on emotional school-based avoidance, and how to support young carers. So we've also devised an action plan. An attendance policy has been written, and accompanying and head teacher packs will be available from September. If I can just share my screen a moment and go through some data with you, because I know obviously the whole point of scrutiny today was to look at our data. So just very briefly then, our primary school attendance, we can see the slight decline in the 2021-22, but you can see an increase in 22-23, and we hope that that will increase again to get us up to where we were. We don't have the all Wales figures because Welsh Assembly weren't drawing on that data down from Hub for those 2 years, but we hope by the next year we'll have that information for you. And similarly with the secondary school data, you can see there was quite a big blip there in 21-22, but a bigger increase from this year. And again, we hope, we've seen a lot of schools attendance improve, and we'd like to just make sure that that continues to improve. And we think we've got the strategies to enable us to do so. That's probably it in a nutshell, but I'd open up to any questions or invite Kate or Helen if they want to sort of add to anything I've said there.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Helen. Is Helen or Kate, have you got anything to add or?
No further comment from me, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, great questions. And I can see Angela's put her hand up. Angela. Councillor Angela Connor.
Hiya, sorry. Hi, Helen. Thank you for that. It's reassuring to see that the stats have gone up, and I would expect them hopefully to go up the next time. I think it's understandable why they obviously dipped. I don't know whether we know the figures from across the UK as opposed to just Wales. Not that I'm expecting to show them now, but as in I presume this is across the whole of the UK that the figures dropped and that they're gradually rising.
I mean, that's my understanding, Councillor O'Connor. Definitely, we're seeing the same sort of pictures in England as well. I've only got some statistics for Wales, and I don't have them for England, but we can certainly find out and make sure. But I suspect they're seeing the same pattern.
I'm sort of suspecting that. And when you said about a change in approach? What do you mean in terms of changing how you deal with it? And if so, could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, certainly. It's basically the things I've said so far. In terms of we're really looking and scrutinising data in a different way than we have been doing. Targeting schools, targeting individual groups, using those strategies which I've outlined earlier on in terms of emotional-based school avoidance, using our new policy, making sure that head teachers are using the pack that we've providing for them, so that we've got consistency across the entire local authority. But also we want to be working more with, in terms of community-based schools, we want to be working more with our family liaison officers from schools. We want to be looking at how we can provide a similar service. I mean, we're quite tight on capacity at the moment, but we have been given a little grant in which we'd like to ensure that we've got some attendance support officers to go out and do that individual work, that we can, you know, that the time that can be afforded to them to be able to build up relationships. We very much see the approach as a relationship building approach, and to make sure that we've got enough support for our families who are in crisis at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
I've got Councillor Robert Smith. Robert, you put your hand up, and then Mike Day.
Yes, just to come in there and support what Helen is saying, really. We've got a lot of data on school attendance. A lot is corrected. And I think what's important is that we don't become obsessed with chasing targets and trying to increase data here, increase the data there, making it look better, but that we interrogate that data to tell us, what does this tell us about the needs of our child population and indeed the population of Swansea in general? What trends exist? And how we can use that information to formulate the response to this issue. And I think that's going to be the key thing, rather than chasing 0.1% here or 0.5% there. I think we need to move away, and have moved away from that approach, and so it's a lot more refined in terms of what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. That's really important, isn't it? We all recognise that, as Robert was saying, it's not just a question of looking at the figures and attendance per se. It's actually the fact that pupils are learning. And from that perspective, I was interested to perhaps explore a little bit about, first of all, any studies that have been done on reasons for non-attendance. I think we can all kind of come up with our own views, particularly after the impact of COVID. But the individual reasons that there might be for pupils not attending, is it just a question of them getting out of the habit of attending school, or in some cases maybe that they're actually feeling that they can learn as much at home as they could in school? So it's just a question of that, plus then the balance between the partnership of the central resource in terms of EWOs and then schools in relation to how those issues are tackled, and the wider partnership issues, where I think you touched upon it, Helen, where we're talking about family related issues, and therefore education's engagement with social services colleagues to see whether there are issues that are preventing attendance because of family backgrounds or certain situations. So I'm sorry, there's sort of a few questions involved in that. First of all, is any further studies for reasons? Secondly, then, is looking at the partnerships that are going on between the EWO central department, schools, and also other agencies.
Great, thank you, Mike.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Day. I have seen a consultation from Welsh Government. They've just released a consultation in regards to belonging and engaging in education. And within that, they do list a number of key reasons why potentially children are not attending school in the way that we would hope. They do touch upon the fact that the pandemic has caused or has exacerbated listed a few issues, you know, in terms of non-attendance, and certainly some children are out of touch with attending regularly. But they do list a number of other reasons. I can pull it up now, or I can send you the link for that consultation. But there were lots and lots of reasons why, and they are complex, aren't they? And I don't think we can talk about one in isolation with another. They talk about, you know, ACEs, for example, which hasn't actually been touched upon previously. They talk about other protected characteristics maybe being difficult for the child with a protected characteristic to be able to attend without appropriate support. They do talk about army and forces, children of forces. There's lots and lots of issues that I know that there are reasons why that children are not attending in the way we should. But the consultation report and the consultation document does bring together those studies as to how and why and who those children are. It's a very good consultation because it does give links to lots of different reports and lots of different strategies for improvement. So that's something that we've really welcomed as a local authority in how we can embed any changes. So I'm hoping that might answer your first question. I think your second question was around the wider partnership and who we're working with. I suppose as many people as we can and will work with. We've got very strong links with Child and Family Services. We work very closely with our early help hubs. I do know, and actually early help hubs were part of our consultation process when we were talking about putting together a new policy. I do know that there is actually a bit of a backlog at the moment and a waiting list for children, families to be worked with early help hubs. And I think we've got that problem in a lot of our different areas in terms of health, in terms of our early help hub, but in terms of other places like Barod or wherever else that that we can get support from. I think hopefully building up that community and that idea of a village raising a child can really sort of take heed in Swansea. We know we've got some really good practices, and I think that is the important thing here, to bring that community together and make sure that we are supporting the child.
Okay, great. Thank you. Before Councillor Sue Jones has got a question. Could I ask you to send us that link, Helen? That
yes,
would be,
certainly.
I'm sure people would welcome that. Thank you. Sue.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Helen. It was really interesting. I just wondered if our young carers population has increased since COVID, because obviously the knock-on effect for COVID has got implications for young people. And I just wondered if that was involved, that was included in the data that you're going to send us the link for.
Yes, that is interesting. There is a document within the link around young carers and what can be done to support young carers. But I think part of the Young Carers Pledge would be that there is a database. I think young carers themselves are asking for a database where we hold that information on carers as part of the pledges. So we are working towards that, but we don't have it at the moment because there's no legal requirement for us to hold that data, and there's no real way that we can do that without the permission of the child. So we're working towards that. But in terms of young carers, our EWOs and our schools, we're working with the YMCA and with partners in social services to increase awareness for young carers, because they are a very hidden and important part of our school population.
Thank you for that, Helen, and I encourage them to fill in the assessment forms. Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you. Okay, I can't see any other hands up, but can I ask? You mentioned, obviously the strategy. A number of us visited Dylan Thomas School a number of years ago, and there was a simple thing that they did actually to encourage children to go to school, and that was to actually go out into the yard to greet them. And you had the teachers and the head teacher out there just to say hello, good morning, you know, nice to see you. Did you have a good trip here, and so on. And certainly a lot of that meant a lot to a lot of those children. Have we got a sort of, you mentioned a pack that you were sending out. It would be useful for us to see that pack.
Yes, certainly.
But also, what interventions have you been using, like the one that we saw that worked so well in Dylan Thomas?
We're encouraging our schools to use as many different interventions as obviously that they can, and schools obviously know their children the best, and they know what interventions work for their children. And I think, yeah, Dylan Thomas, that worked brilliantly, and I know they've got something similar in other schools as well. In Kevin Hengoed especially, I think they do something quite similar. In terms of the pack, sorry. Oh, sorry, Councillor Jones.
Sorry, I just said Angawiton.
And Gowerton. Yeah, so the interventions are listed, and they're best practice from the schools that are currently using them. So we're using that as a brochure really for EWOs to be able to go into schools and suggest strategies. You know, attendance is really the responsibility of the whole school, and we come in and suggest, and we can work with our schools to suggest and help and support and advise in terms of strategies. Within the consultation document, again, it does very much talk about that that kindness, that ACE awareness approach, that trauma-informed approach, where when you're encouraging children to come in, and that is a very key strategy for us, to be treated with kindness when you're coming in after being away for some time is a really, really key strategy.
Great, thanks, Kate. Thanks, Helen. Kate, you want to come in?
Yeah, just really briefly, I think, you know, what Helen's outlining and, you know, those suggestions of practice that you've shared in relation to specific schools is really about the principle of building really good, positive, welcoming relationships. And that's really kind of what underpins this work. So it might look slightly different in each school, but what Helen and the team are doing is supporting and providing tools for individual communities to work with their families, children and young people, just to create those positive, welcoming relationships first of all, and then everything else kind of comes from that. So that sort of underpins our approach in many ways.
Great, thank you. Can I ask, since COVID, have the number of children now receiving home medication gone up?
In terms of elective home medication, or would you mean home tuition, or both really?
Both really, yeah. Well, so in other words, children who have chosen, or the parents have chosen, to educate their children at home themselves rather than send them to school.
There has been a very slight increase in the numbers of elective home medication. Nowhere near, I think, where we were anticipating. I haven't got the numbers on hand at the moment, but I do know it's a very small increase. I think it's gone, you know, I won't quote, but it's not a huge increase. It's either around the same or slight increase. It's nowhere near we were expecting.
Great. Could you let us have not the percentages, but the numbers of children involved in that? That would be quite helpful. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Oh, Sandra, Councillor Sandra Joy.
Hi. First of all, I do think you've got a mammoth task ahead of you until these youngsters, the COVID experienced ones, work through the system, if I'm honest. But my question would be, have you, when you've looked at the data, are there any particular year groups or strands that you have identified that you are able to focus on?
I think I can quite categorically say, I think, that every year group has issues, and there are problems in every year group. In terms, yeah, there is nothing really that we can identify in terms of different year groups. What we've got are cohorts where there are difficulties in each year group. So at the moment, what we can see is that the data, when we do our deep dive, we can see that there are sort of correlations between different areas and different and attendance, but we can't see anything specific in year groups. We know that traditionally year 11 have always dipped off towards the end, but we can't see anything specific in year group across year group. Kate, did you want to come in? Sorry.
Yeah, it was just to back that up really, and I think what we're seeing is because some of the challenges are really for families and for society, it impacts on children. You know, 2 or 3 children in a family are impacted. So it's not that we're seeing kind of a cut-off from when COVID started as such. It's more that whole impact on families and society that means that every child within a family will be perhaps experiencing the same challenges in terms of achieving regular attendance. So yeah, just exactly not per year group as such.
So just to expand on that, I mean, it's reassuring to know that, for example, children who were in the middle of transition from primary to secondary, for example, aren't particularly affected by that experience. But in terms of it sounds like it's the family threads. Would you suggest that perhaps it's particular areas of Swansea that are more affected, particular catchment areas and so on? Or again, is it across the county?
Helen, did you want to come in before I say anything? Sorry.
Yeah, Councillor Joy, thanks, Helen. Yeah, I've been doing a little bit of deep diving really in terms of the data myself, and I can see there is a direct correlation in terms of our most challenged areas, in socio-economically challenged, I mean by that. So there is a direct correlation. So we can see, I think we've mentioned it in other committees where we've got a stubborn rate of improvement in certain schools, and that's where we're targeting our resources. Helen mentioned a grant earlier, so it's very easy for us to identify really a target group of schools, both in secondary and the primary sector, where we feel they would benefit more from an injection really of either cash or human resource really to help them engage better with their parents, primarily to ensure that they've got that positive relationship that Kate described.
Kate.
Sorry, was that me? I didn't have anything further to add.
Okay, great, thanks.
Sorry, thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? No. Could I thank Helen? Helen Howells. Too many Helens today, or never enough Helens, they say. But thank you very much, for that report, and we look forward to receiving the links on that pack. So thank you very much, and to Kate and Helen and Robert. Right, the next item on the agenda is managing and improving school exclusions, including data. And again, Councillor Robert Smith wants to say a few words, and then we have obviously the Director of Education, and then Kate and Helen. Robert.
Yes, thank you, Jen. I think it's a similar story in relation to exclusions, although we were dealing with distinct problems here. We saw exclusions increase significantly increased a great deal, I should say, after the pandemic. It's an issue in Swansea, as it is an issue across the whole of Wales, and I believe across the whole of the UK. What the report does is outline what we're doing to keep an eye on the problem, how we're monitoring what schools are doing, but also how are we supporting schools and supporting the families that are affected by exclusions. Excluding a pupil is the last thing that anyone in the system, not any school, wants to do. Certainly, permanent exclusion is the very last thing we want to do. But sometimes that's the only answer. As I say, it's the last thing we want to do, and we want to make sure that where it does happen or where it's required as a temporary measure, that there is an alternative provision made that meets the need of the child or the young person. So again, I'll hand over to the officers, and then perhaps we'll have a discussion afterwards.
Great, fine, thanks. Who's going to kick off?
I think that might be me again. Sorry.
No, don't say that. We look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'd just like to echo Councillor Smith's comments. Our schools were struggling to support all learners after the pandemic. We do have an exclusion analyzer, which shows us that in terms of fixed term exclusions, only 3 comprehensive schools and the PRU have seen increases in the number of fixed term exclusions that they've issued this year, which is quite pleasing. The rest, I will add, have gone down quite dramatically. And it's even more interesting when you dig a little bit deeper into the data, and only if you put together 4 comprehensives along with our PRU, they do make up approximately 70% of all our fixed term exclusions that are issued across Swansea. So we can see that we're really trying to really analyse our data properly and put that wraparound support in place for those 4 comprehensives. And I will say, out of those 4 comprehensives, one of them has decreased this year compared with last, and we do expect that to keep declining. Permanent exclusions, our data shows, are decreasing. We had 36 issued last year, with 11 of those subsequently rescinded. 26 have been issued this year, with 6 subsequently rescinded. What's different this year is that 11 of those permanent exclusions were issued in the summer term. That's very much unheard of, with traditionally only 1 or 2 are ever issued in the summer term. We've got no hard evidence at the moment as to why that could be the case. The only difference that we can think about this year to last is the number of potential disruptions to the school days in the summer term this year, but we are exploring that hypothesis further. So it's pleasing that the number of permanent exclusions has decreased. We know that actually that's not the picture nationally. The picture nationally is that permanent exclusions have increased in almost every other local authority. And we recognise the upheaval for the child for any permanent exclusion, and the distress that that family can find themselves under in that situation also. Our inclusion team does work hard to ensure that the education of the child is not disrupted, and our data shows that in the last academic year, 13 children of those children who were permanently excluded were enrolled in different mainstream schools in a very timely way, and the remainder were provided with education other than at school or UTAS. So what we want in our team is early prevention and intervention strategies, and we've tried to employ those as much as possible, because we feel that, you know, we don't want to be firefighting, we want to be preventing more than trying to deal with it after the event. Our data, for example, around managed moves, which is one of our key strategies, is very pleasing. In the last academic year, it was let's have a look. Only 2 resulted in application for UTAS, and we arranged 50 managed moves. 70 have been arranged this year up until July. So we're really pleased that we've got more schools taking up trauma-informed practices, for example, which we feel will lend itself really well to proactive and preemptive sort of interventions. We're looking again at data in terms of My Concern and the way that schools are recording on My Concern, and we've used in the Clarity software around that. So what we'd like to do is make sure that the children have access to the curriculum, and we've actually put a secondment together for an officer to be an education inclusion officer, looking at bespoke timetables, looking at external provision, looking at different ways which we can make sure that child has their education. We know that sitting in the classroom isn't right for every single one of them. We're looking at producing a language guide in conjunction with our CMET colleagues from Child and Family. We want further scrutiny of data, and we're looking very clearly at a multi-agency response. We've got we know that we want to work in terms of a whole school approach, and we've got interventions such as our emotional literacy support advisors to be able to promote that prevention and early intervention, which we feel is absolutely key to making sure that exclusions are reduced. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Sorry, you've got, no, great, thank you very much. Yeah, you know, for that. Are there any questions? I'm looking on screen. I can't see any on screen. And oh yes, we've got James in the Gloucester room. Do it that way.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for that. It was just really in relation to section 2.1, where you were talking about how a few schools have bucked the long-term trend. Although from what you were saying in terms of your verbal report, it sounds like it may be more that there's a small number of schools that have, I don't want to say big problems, but have unique challenges, maybe a better way of phrasing it. But what I was going to ask is, you know, what are those few schools that have really bucked the long-term trends? Have you managed to sort of tease out where they may be doing something differently? Is it catchments, as was mentioned earlier, for attendance?
Not so much. What the schools that we're talking about, who are specifically one who was one of the only ones who bucked the trend last year, what they have is incredibly strong pastoral support within the school. So they've got a number of different facilities, a house system set up to support you know, any problems that come along, and a very, very good record of ensuring their children remain within school rather than apply to a YOTUS provision. So it's about having that embedded, strong structure of pastoral support within the school.
Great. Any follow-up, James? Or
no? Well, great. That's great. Thank you. The only minor follow-up is just in connection with the previous report. Do those schools which are doing well for exclusions correlate with good attendance as well? Is it something that works its way through the whole school?
It's not always the case, unfortunately, right. And I think it basically comes back to what Kate was saying earlier. We're talking about the families and the issues that are happening within families, but it doesn't always correlate with exclusions. We've got, when we're talking about attendance, we're talking about the emotional-based school avoidance as well, and that long-term embedded, you know, issues within families. So it doesn't always correlate, but really interesting to see how many schools have actually reduced their fixed term exclusions rate this year. It's quite pleasing.
Thank you, Helen. Councillor Mike Day. Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Lyndon. Thanks again, Helen, for the presentation and the information. It's obviously another difficult issue when we're talking about behaviour leading to exclusions, and you know, it's being able to sort of see ways in which we can promote positive behaviour as much as kind of dealing with adverse behaviour, if we can call it that. Yeah. I'm also conscious of the fact that we, as a scrutiny committee, are there to kind of check on how things are going, and to see what's working, what's not working, and to look at ways in which things can be improved for the future. So, you know, kind of an open-ended question. What do you think? What would you like to see happening in order to improve the situation? What have you identified? You mentioned just a couple of things in your response to James, the things that are highlighted as perhaps working better than others. What else would you like to see taking place, and how is that best practice being able to be distributed amongst other schools?
I think I'm probably going to say the same thing as every other officer would ever say here. I would love more resource. We would always love that, but we know that that's not always possible, and that's okay. So we work smarter. In terms of those specific schools that are potentially have a higher rates than others. What I'd like to see and what I'll be doing next is putting a little team around the school and working with those schools. And actually, I think that's something the head teachers would welcome. They would welcome ideas and strategies, learning from that good practice. So that would be my next phase, is putting together good practice from those schools who are doing incredibly well and keeping those exclusion rates down really low. Because I'm not saying that behaviour isn't in all schools. It is. It's everywhere, no matter where your demographic is. That there are problem areas, but schools are working hard to keep those exclusion rates down low and making sure that all the issues are dealt with within their own communities. And that is good practice, and that good practice can be shared. So I think it's about working with the schools, and again, they I'm sure, I think they've said themselves they'd be more than happy to work with us to understand what other schools are doing and to look at what we can do to support. Other services, of course, are going to be pivotal here. We can't do everything on our own, and we can't change societal problems on our own. It has to be a collective. So that would be my thoughts, but I can see that Kate has got her hand up.
Great, thank you, Helen. Kate.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And just kind of to build on that, I think one of the things that we're trying to develop now going forward is shifting our language and thinking. So it's not about exclusion, it's about inclusion, and it's about promoting that opportunity for every child. And one of the things that has been particularly successful in Swansea has been our managed move protocol. And the reason we've had success with that is because our head teachers have worked with us collegiately as a local authority, and we've taken a collective ownership and responsibility of challenges, and taken the view that children belong to all of us and are all of our responsibility to support and to advocate for. And so where a situation may become challenging in one setting, that doesn't mean that it's going to be challenging in every setting, and that we can come together collectively, bring all of our kind of resource expertise and sharing to promote that. And I guess in terms of what we'd like to do going forward to strengthen that as much as we can, and to continue reviewing and refreshing that to make sure that it stays really live and really relevant, I think would be an aim.
Great, thank you. I've got Councillor Robert Smith and then Councillor Angela O'Connor. So Robert first.
Thank you, Chair. I think both Helen and Kate have said that the key word here is working with schools, and I think that's going to be crucial moving forward. Making sure the schools have the flexibility to respond to the situation confronting them, but also trying to look at things like, when do we intervene? Is it an inconsistency across schools in how issues are dealt with? Trying to make sure that there's early intervention to prevent problems from escalating. It's not rocket science, but they are measures that need to be put in place, and we need to be working with our schools on this, because, as I said, each school is different. Each school responds to its own set of issues, and it's being for us to be sympathetic and supportive, as well as challenging schools where appropriate.
Thank you, Robert. Angela.
Yeah, hi there. Thank you, Chair. I don't know whether I'm going to word this right and how to say it in the right way, but obviously, from my understanding, every school do they have their own sort of pastoral care in place to deal with such issues? And if so, I guess it's kind of, some people work better with certain people. Some people like certain people, some people don't, and that's just life. And so therefore, is there or could there be a team of people, rather than on an individual basis per school, that deal with sort of the whole of Swansea? And that maybe if that particular person is not working well with a particular family, they can try a different person. Because I know when we went to Maesteru, they said, that sometimes does happen there. Am I making sense? So that when, there are issues, maybe be it with parents or children, and the attendance is low, and kind of, integrating them in the school and dealing with such issues, whatever those issues may be, that because I think what I'm trying to say is some people will have better luck with some families and they'll form really good bonds and relationships and they'll be successful on lots of other levels. And I'm not saying that that same person is going to work with every single family either, because they won't. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know actually where I'm going down the right path here, if I'm making sense to you, as in a universal board of people, because obviously money is tight, and talking about working smarter, rather than employing different people in different schools, is there one, and then the budget can be increased. Sorry if I rabbited then.
No, it makes sense.
Great, thanks, Angela. Yeah, no, it did. And Kate has got a hand up, raring to go.
Yeah, no, it did make perfect sense. And we have limited resource, but it doesn't mean we have no resource. And we do have some central teams who can help with exactly that kind of activity that you're talking about. And so, we've got our pupil engagement team and our education welfare service and our ALN caseworkers, who have got roles in terms of working with schools, supporting relationships, sometimes being that bridge between home and school. Sometimes schools don't need that support, sometimes they do, when that's not necessarily a reflection on anybody. It's just as you've outlined, really, relationships are different between different people at different points in time. So we're very mindful of that, and we can't take a fixed or rigid approach to it. What we've got to do is see what a family needs at the time when they need it, and put our support in place based on the resource we have available. And we've got some skilled officers, and there are some skilled people in schools too.
Thank you, Kate. Sorry, that's kind of what I was trying to allude to. And it's not really, when you talk about best practice and putting the rules in place, it's not like a one size fits all, is it?
Not at all. Absolutely.
It works with that family. This is going to work with this family. And I think,
quite.
Thank you for answering that and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions? No. Could I just ask one? We talked about the permanent exclusions. Are there some pupils who are excluded for one term, possibly, or for a period of time? And what sort of numbers are we talking about there?
I think that would be a fixed term exclusion. We wouldn't necessarily have it for a long length of time in terms of one term. We have 1.9 full-time equivalent inclusion officers to support schools and work with them and give them advice based on Welsh Government guidance. And Welsh Government guidance is very, very clear that any fixed term exclusion should be as low as possible, and keep it as low as possible, so as not to detriment the child. It's very rare that any exclusion would go over 5 days for a fixed term exclusion.
I think there was an issue 20 years ago of certain schools were excluding pupils. They were fixed term exclusions, but in reality they were permanent exclusions, because they were having a number of consecutive fixed term exclusions. And I think that's, as Helen says, that the Welsh Government were very concerned about that some 20 years ago, and I think we've moved on a lot since then. And I'm not saying it's been eradicated, but there's a lot less evidence of that now than there was at one point.
Okay, great, fine, thank you. I can see Sue has got her hand up, and Angela, is that a legacy hand or you? There we are, Sue, Councillor Sue Jones.
Thank you. It's not a question, just an observation. Some of these children have got issues at home that spill into school. And I just wondered if the LACs were actually involved in maybe talking to parents on issues. I don't know if that's
a really good point. We actually invited the local area coordinators to a meeting yesterday to talk to our EWOs and to talk to some of our Cynnydd workers, or old Cynnydd workers. The new name is going to be launched in September, in terms of what we can do to support the children as part of the community. Because I think I might have mentioned it once or twice, I'm really passionate about the fact that the community should be involved with the child and with the school. So yes, it's something that we're really keen to promote more. And it was very interesting, some of the things that they were saying, and some of the things that they're doing within the community, and how, well, I was thinking 2 and 2 and putting 2 and 2 together and coming up with 5, how they can help schools and children as well. So it's definite possibility.
And I think, Sue, you've hit the nail on the head there, because not simply with the lacks, but that's, if this system is going to work, we need all practitioners working together and working with families, so that there's no silo working, and that, you know, each practitioner working with children and young people, working with families, if it's appropriate to share information with others, and they're confident to do that, and that becomes the norm rather than the exception.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, and I think we're moving towards that.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
Oh.
No. So, well, Helen and Kate, thank you very much indeed, you know, for, you know, pretty, a really, you know, good
Interesting.
report, and really interesting in the work that is going on. And we look forward to seeing the links and the pack and so on. But thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. As we move on, the next item on the agenda is the work program. Before I do that, I'll just say that one thing that I forgot to mention was just to note the letter that I'd sent to Councillor Robert Smith and so on. So you've got a copy of that in your pack. But yeah, the last item on the agenda then is the work program, and that was agreed at the last meeting, and that shows that our next meeting is on the 14th of September. So with that in mind, could I thank you all for attending today, and for some of us, have a safe journey home, and others, well, you might be there now, but have a good summer, and we'll see you soon.